Mr. President, on another topic, over the weekend, President Trump hosted a military parade to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army and coincidentally his 79th birthday. Spending up to $45 million of taxpayers' money on this kind of pomp and circumstances, while at the same time proposing a budget to eviscerate medical research for the military and to take health insurance away from 16 million Americans, is not a cause for national celebration. Meanwhile, the president's crypto business unfolds. Throughout his first term, President Trump was officially skeptical of cryptocurrency. In a social media post from July 11, 2019, the president said, quote, "I'm not a fan of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which are not money and whose value is highly volatile and based on thin air. Unregulated crypto assets can facilitate unlawful behavior, including drug trade and other illegal activity." That is a quote from the president in his first term. Once the president figured out how to personally make this a part of his investment portfolio, his tune changed. This is how President Trump is using the unregulated crypto industry to enrich himself and his family. 3 days before he took office, President Trump launched his Memecoin, a novelty item similar to baseball cards or Beanie Babies. They hold no intrinsic value. Memecoins are risky and highly volatile. Despite the risk, many investors purchased President Trump's Memecoin. And in the first few weeks after its launch, the president, in his second term, profited up to $100 million in trading fees, while more than 200,000 investors lost money. There's never been a precedent for anything like this in the history of the presidency. Then President Trump auctioned off access to himself by hosting a crypto gala dinner here in Washington. The president made a whopping $148 million just off this dinner from 220 investors willing to pay for FaceTime with the president. But nearly half the winners of this Memecoin dinner competition were still losers. 95 attendees suffered a net $8.95 million loss by purchasing President Trump's Memecoin. In total, 764,000 investors lost money to President Trump's Memecoin scam, but his corruption does not stop there. His family started its own crypto firm now, World Liberty Financial, and in March they launched their own stablecoin right as the Senate was working on the Genius Act, legislation to regulate, so-called regulate, the stablecoin market. Conveniently, this legislation allows the president and his family to continue owning and issuing stablecoins. There's never been anything like this in the history of the presidency. Passing the Genius Act will help the stablecoin market grow tenfold over the next 3 years to a $2 trillion market. I'm going to vote no on this legislation when it comes up this week. We prohibit members of Congress from activity in cryptocurrency. The same should be true for the presidency. Why are we having two different standards? I think the answer is obvious. That means that if the Senate passes this legislation tomorrow, it would give Congress's blessing for President Trump and his family to further enrich themselves with very little protection for consumers. President Trump's crypto dealings reportedly account for nearly 40% of his net worth. All of the years and decades of investment notwithstanding, 40% of President Trump's net worth has been generated in just a few months in the second term of his presidency with this cryptocurrency. In just a few months, the Trump family, has pulled in approximately $1 billion from crypto. $1 billion. Tomorrow's vote on the Genius Act could bring us closer to enabling the President Trump's latest scam. This is shameful. It is corrupt, especially since we could have stopped this from happening if we'd have conducted an open amendment process as Leader Thune promised. We could have had amendments on the floor that would have brought real regulation to this industry. Instead, we have phony regulation. I filed an amendment to crack down on ATM operators who've been scamming seniors out of their life savings with crypto machines. My amendment would have created guardrails to prevent crypto ATM fraud. Approximately 13 states have already done so. We should do so on a national basis, but we won't have that opportunity. They have foreclosed all amendments to this bill. We can't even debate it on the floor and ask for a vote. Instead, the Genius Act will allow the crypto scam to continue at the expense of unsuspecting Americans and to the enrichment of the president and his family. I yield the floor.